I'm not in your HOA. 6 words, and that woman looked at me like I'd just confessed to arson on her begonias. Then she called the cops. That was the part that really got me. Not the violation notice. Not the speech about community standards. Not even the way she stood on my walkway with that little clipboard tucked to her chest like it was a badge. No. It was the fact that Constance Whitmore honestly believed she could summon the police because my truck was parked wrong in front of a house on a street where, as she was about to learn, I own almost a whole block, including her place. So there I was, standing on my own sidewalk in Kettlebrook, Ohio, while a patrol officer listened to Constance list my offenses in that tight, polished voice of hers, refusing lawful notices, disrupting neighborhood order, creating confusion for residents. People like me not understanding how things work around here. She really said that. People like me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't explain. I just let her keep going, because sometimes the best thing you could do is hand somebody enough rope and step back while they braid it into a noose. I grew up about 40 miles south of Kettlebrook, in a little Ohio town where everybody knew who patched your roof, who skipped church, and who still owed money at the hardware store. My dad was a pipe fitter. My mom worked county dispatch. Between the two of them, I learned some useful things early. Read every line before you sign it. Keep records. And never assume a confident person is a competent one. In my 20s, I did HVAC work. Crawl spaces in July that felt like breathing through a wet towel. Attics in January cold enough to turn your knuckles red in 10 minutes. Ductwork full of dust, grease, and the smell of 20 years of somebody else's dinners. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. I saved. I bought a 4-unit rental at 31, got my education the hard way, then bought another property, then another, over time. With help from a contractor buddy of mine named Dwayne, I started picking up distressed houses on one street in Kettlebrook, Ridgers Lane, fixing them up one by one, keeping them solid, keeping the lawns cut, keeping the tenants decent and the roofs dry. By the spring this story happened, I owned 14 of the 17 houses on Ridgers Lane outright, plus 2 empty lots at the east end. Nobody really thought about me much. That was by design. I drove an old pickup with a cracked dash. I showed up when there was a leak, a broken fence, a furnace issue, a bad outlet. I wasn't out there playing neighborhood king. I had work to do. Constance. On the other hand, Constance had made a whole identity out of managing other people's business. She'd lived on Ridgers Lane for years and founded something called the Ridgers Meadows HOA, which sounded official enough until you looked too closely. She had rules, notices, newsletters, little meetings, a whole stack of covenants and restrictions written in the tone of a middle school hall monitor who had recently discovered legal stationery. She had appointed herself president, and from the way she carried that clipboard, I think she believed the title came with divine authority. The whole thing really started because of a boat. One of my tenants, a retired schoolteacher named Phyllis, lived at 412 Ridgers. Sweet woman, spine of steel, the kind of person who could say, "Excuse me," and make you feel like a fool. Her late husband had left behind an old fishing boat, covered, tucked off to the side on private gravel, not hurting a soul. Constance slid a violation notice under her door, saying the boat had to go or fines would begin. Phyllis called me, voice trembling just a little. That boat was the last piece of her husband she wasn't ready to let go of. I drove over, read the notice, and felt that cold little click in my chest I always get when somebody mistakes arrogance for jurisdiction. Because 412 Ridgers was not in her HOA. I knew that because I had the deeds. I had the parcel records. I had never signed a single document binding that property to her association. So I called her and told her exactly that, calmly, plainly, coffee in hand. She pushed back right away, said every house on Ridgers was part of the HOA. I told her no. The recorded covenants covered only certain parcel numbers, and mine were not among them. She tried to call it a clerical issue. I told her intent doesn't bind property in Ohio. Recorded documents do. I hung up feeling maybe a little too pleased with myself. That was my mistake. I thought facts would slow her down. They did not. A few days later, she was back at Phyllis's place at 7 in the morning, taking pictures of the boat, leaving a more aggressive notice. This one dressed up with language she clearly found online the night before. It mentioned nuisance law in a way that made no legal sense at all. She was just stapling random authority onto paper and hoping it looked frightening. So I stopped arguing and started documenting. I sent her a certified letter stating, in plain English, that 412 Ridgers was not subject to her HOA, and any further contact with my tenant over HOA compliance would be considered harassment. She signed for it. Then she ignored it. Then she showed up on Phyllis's porch in person and delivered some long, rehearsed speech about standards while Phyllis stood there with her oatmeal getting cold behind the screen door. That was when I quit being patient. I drove over that afternoon and found Constance standing at another one of my houses, 407 this time, bothering a young teacher couple about flower beds. I got out of my truck, walked up, and told her again that property wasn't her HOA either. Then I unfolded a county parcel map I'd marked myself. 14 houses highlighted. Mine, not hers. Not hers to manage. Not hers to regulate. Not hers to threaten. She looked at that map like it had personally insulted her. I told her she had authority over 3 houses, maybe, and none over the rest. I said it as evenly as I could. She smiled the thin little smile people use when they're losing, but haven't accepted it yet. After that, she escalated in every direction she could think of. She called city code enforcement on several of my properties. Fine. The inspector came out, found a loose gutter and 1 fence board missing. I fixed both in 48 hours. She sent newsletters around the neighborhood warning about outside investor interests, threatening community character. That phrase irritated me more than I can explain. It sounds polite, but what it really means is, here comes somebody we can blame for everything. And for a week or so, it worked. Folks I'd waved to for years got a little colder. So I started knocking on doors. Quietly. Not to charm anybody. Not to campaign. Just to tell the truth. I spoke to Dorothy Pratt, who was furious to discover Constance had quoted her in a newsletter without asking. I talked to Gus Fenway, 78 years old, hearing aids in both ears, who shook my hand on the porch and said, "Petty people get big when nobody checks them." That line stayed with me. Then Constance hired a lawyer. Not a good one, but a lawyer all the same. He sent me a letter claiming my properties were bound by implied covenant obligations. Real phrase, wrong facts. That kind of argument only works if an owner had notice and acted like they were in the HOA for years. I'd never attended a meeting, never paid dues, never signed anything, never accepted a single scrap of their authority. So I forwarded the letter to my attorney, Shelby Rohr, who had the kind of dry, lethal competence that makes weak legal theories curl up and die. Her response was short, sharp, and backed with enough law to make opposing counsel suddenly rediscover brevity. Still, Constance kept going. She filed a complaint with the city over my rentals, not knowing I was already fully registered and compliant. She filed with the Ohio Real Estate Commission, claiming I was acting as an unlicensed property manager, not understanding that owners managing their own properties are exempt. Every time she reached for another lever, all she did was create another paper trail, another false claim, another official record showing she was using government process as a weapon because she couldn't win on the facts. And then, late one Thursday night, while I was digging through county land records with cold coffee and a fan rattling the corner, I found the crack that changed everything. Her HOA hadn't even properly recorded its own covenants. Not fully. She claimed 11 houses belonged to the Ridgers Meadows HOA. But when I pulled the title histories parcel by parcel, only 8 actually showed the HOA covenant as a recorded encumbrance. 3 of her supposed member properties had clean titles. No recorded HOA restriction at all. That mattered. A lot. It meant at least 2 homeowners had been paying dues to an association that had no lawful claim over them. One man, Clifton, had paid for years. A younger couple had torn down a shed because Constance told them it violated HOA rules that never legally applied to them in the first place. When I explained what I'd found, they were furious. Shelby sent a formal demand letter seeking return of dues, damages, and fees. The amount got her attention fast. Suddenly, the woman who had strutted around the block with a clipboard was staring at potential fraud claims and insurance exposure. That's when I laid the quiet trap. At the east end of Ridgerous Lane sat a little gazebo everybody called the community gazebo. Cute little structure. Folding chairs sometimes. HOA meetings. Flyers. Neighborhood griping. Constance loved that gazebo. Problem was it sat on one of my vacant lots. I'd known that for a while. Never made an issue of it. But now I had the lot surveyed, staked, and fenced with a low split-rail fence. Clean cedar. Gate unlatched. No lock. No sign. I blocked nothing. I just made the property line visible. Then I waited. It took Constance 3 days to lose her mind. She left me a long voicemail demanding I remove the fence because the gazebo was a community asset. I sent back a certified letter with a copy of my deed and the parcel map, explaining that I had allowed community use as a courtesy, that the gate remained open, and that nothing unlawful had occurred. So she called the police. That brings me back to the sidewalk. Officer Briggs stood there calm, notebook out, while Constance explained her theory about community easements and intimidation. He asked her one simple question. Did she have documentation of any recorded easement on the lot? She did not. He checked the gate. It opened. He saw no trespassing signs. He listened to me, glanced at my deed photo, wrote down parcel numbers, and then told her, politely, firmly, that this was a civil matter and no ordinance had been violated. That should have ended it. It didn't. She called the police again the next morning. Same result. 2 days later came the city council meeting, where Constance planned to push a rezoning petition against my so-called rental cluster. By then, a local reporter had started digging to the public records, and the whole mess was beginning to smell bad in daylight. The meeting room had those humming fluorescent lights, and a tired government building smell, cleaner, and old paper and stale air. Constance showed up in a blazer and pearls, looking ready to be the reasonable adult in the room. I sat there with Shelby, my title reports, and enough documentation to sink a small ship. Constance spoke first. 8 polished minutes about neighborhood character, owner occupancy, stability, all the usual words people use when they want power to sound noble. Then I got up. I laid out the title company reports showing my 14 properties had no HOA encumbrances. I laid out the recording failures on the HOA's own supposed member properties. I laid out the pending claims from homeowners who had paid dues and obeyed rules they were never legally bound to follow. Then Dorothy stood up and read her letter about being misquoted in the newsletter. Clifton spoke about the dues he'd paid. The young couple spoke about the shed they'd torn down. And finally Gus walked to the podium, held both sides of it, and said, in that plain old man voice that carries more weight than any legal memo, that street didn't need saving. It needed somebody to stop making everybody else's lives harder. You could feel the room change. The council tabled Constance's petition. The city attorney was directed to review the matter further. And the loudest part of the whole night wasn't any speech. It was the little crack of the gavel and the silence right after it. That silence was beautiful. In the months that followed, the HOA's insurer settled the claims. Clifton got his dues back. The couple got paid for their shed. The total payout went north of $22,000. Constance resigned in August for personal reasons, which is one of those phrases that covers a lot of wreckage without actually naming it. A new HOA president came in, hired proper counsel, and started cleaning up the recording issues like he should have done from the start. Phyllis kept her husband's boat until the following spring. Then, when she was ready, she donated it to a local youth fishing club. Not because somebody bullied her, because she was ready. That matters. And me, I took those empty lots at the end of the block and started turning them into a little green space. Benches, native plants, something useful. I also set up a small scholarship for local kids going into the trades. HVAC, electrical, plumbing. The kind of path that built my life. The kind of path people look down on right up until the furnace dies in January. What I learned from all this wasn't just that records beat rumors, though they do. It wasn't just that petty people grow bold when nobody checks them, though that's true too. It was something meaner and sadder and more useful than that. A lot of people don't really want fairness. They want control with nicer packaging. They want the comfort of feeling important. And when that feeling gets threatened, they'll wrap selfishness in words like order, standards, and community and call it virtue. But paper is stubborn. Facts are stubborn. And eventually, if you stay calm long enough, truth has a way of making a liar stand alone in a very quiet room. So let me ask you this when somebody abuses a little bit of power to make your life harder. Do you believe in letting it go for the sake of peace, or pushing back until the line is clear? Tell me where you land. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a board, a landlord, or just one self-appointed ruler with a clipboard and too much time, I'd love to hear your story.